All right, let's get started. My name is Sarah Main, and I will be your moderator today. I'd like to welcome you to our webinar, Communicate the Value of Third-Party Maintenance to Your Organization. This webinar is brought to you by Curvature and will feature analyst Rob Brothers. He is a program director for the analyst firm IDC. Also with us today is Jeff Zanardi, a vice president at Curvature, who is a subject matter expert. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hi, thank you.
Before I turn it over to Jeff and Rob, I just want to make sure that everyone is set up and ready to go. So I'll run through a few logistics. All attendees are on mute, so if you have a question or comment, feel free to type it into the questions window of the GoToWebinar. I encourage you to ask questions since we will have a Q&A session at the end. You can also use the questions window to let us know if you're experiencing any technical difficulties. Please make sure to share your thoughts on Twitter. We will be live tweeting during the broadcast today using the hashtag CurvatureWebinar. Lastly, we will be sending you a recorded version and the PDF of the webinar, so you can share it with all of your colleagues or watch it again. Now I'd like to introduce our speakers. First, we will hear from Jeff Zanardi. He's a vice president of Curvature. Jeff has a 25-year track record in the networking and data center industry. He has been advising data center managers, IT managers, and CIOs on their IT infrastructure strategies and has a keen sense for business objectives. His career spans many industries and includes leadership roles at Accenture, MCI, and Cisco. Our featured speaker today is Rob Brothers, Program Director of Hardware and Software Support Services at IDC. His research draws on decades of industry experience where he's provided insight and advice about worldwide hardware and software support programs. Rob's area of expertise include enterprise server, storage, and system support, as well as virtualization services. His research takes into consideration technological expertise along with business strategy to ensure IT maximizes operational and efficiency. Once again, welcome experts. Happy to have you here today. Jeff, why don't you go ahead and kick us off?
Great. Well, thanks, Sarah, and welcome everyone to our webinar. I would like to take a quick moment and introduce those of you that might not be familiar with Curvature. Over 20 years ago, Curvature pioneered the market for used and surplus networking gear. Throughout the years, our business has grown to include sourcing alternatives for networking, server, and storage technologies. We offer new, used, and secondary market equipment from leading manufacturers like Cisco, HP, Dell, Arista, and many others. By offering customers both new and pre-owned equipment, we believe they have the ability to deploy the right solution at the most effective cost. We've also developed and offer a very comprehensive third-party maintenance and support alternative to those offered from the OEM. We support most enterprise and data center equipment. We've built these capabilities around a very simple belief. We believe that customers should have control over how and when they choose to purchase IT equipment, and that they should have the right to determine who is the best alternative to support and maintain that same equipment. We have built a global organization with corporate headquarters in California, Amsterdam, and Singapore, which allows us to provide over 10,000 customers with the ability to purchase and maintain their network infrastructure on their terms, as opposed to that of the traditional OEM. We believe strongly that OEMs force customers into discarding working assets prematurely by forcing them to upgrade on a schedule that is convenient for the OEM. So I encourage you throughout this webinar to look at your own sourcing and maintenance policies and to determine who is actually in control, you or the OEM. In fact, that is the topic of our webinar today. A few years back, we commissioned a study to learn more about the buying patterns for support services. This research determined that 4 out of 5 IT managers said they would buy third-party maintenance alternatives if the pricing was more attractive and the service offered was on par or better than that from the OEM. Today, there are many alternatives for support other than the OEM. but surprisingly, most companies are still using the OEM as their sole support provider. We wanted to know why, right? So we recently commissioned another study to find out. And today we have Rob Brothers from IDC who conducted that research and authored the paper, Peer versus Policy, which dives deep into how support decisions are being made. With that, I'm going to start off by asking you, Rob, a very simple question. How important are support services today?
Hi, good afternoon, good morning all. Thank you, Jeff, for being here. And sir, thank you for dating me by giving the idea that I have decades of experience. So with that, yeah, IDC has been doing an awful lot of studies over the past few years. And so IT, how important is support? We all know it's extremely important, right? It's no shock that IT needs to have their IT assets up 24/7, 365 days a year. It's no shock that IT needs to be doing more with the resources that they have. But what we have been seeing, and some of the trends show this, that businesses are looking to focus more on business and not IT. So a good example would be somebody like ExxonMobil. ExxonMobil is in the business of oil and gas. They're not in the business of IT. So what does that mean? That means that IT needs flexibility on getting IT assets supported. A lot of factors come into this, and one of the big ones is that whole idea of the business needing to use IT more intelligently. And in order to do that, IT needs to work with line of business owners. They need to work with line of business owners in areas such as mobility, big data, cloud, and social. How do you enable that? Well, you enable that by having choice and flexibility on the back end on how a lot of the legacy assets are being supported today. With more flexibility, it allows IT to become more flexible. And really that's the dynamic that we're seeing today, is that IT departments need to be more flexible. They need to drive business and innovation forward. And how do you do that? You do that by relying upon a good support provider. And who should make that determination? Is it corporate policy? Is it OEMs? Or is it what other people are doing in the market space? And I think when we go down through the presentation today, we'll show how really corporate policy may not be the right policy when it comes to supporting your IT assets.
Yeah. So given that the importance of these support contracts and these support organizations, can you walk us through what your research showed is how organizations are really making these decisions today?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, IT is driven by data, and I've been doing the same survey now for about 3 or 4 years. And one of the primary motivational factors has been corporate policy. And corporate policy has been driving how IT should be supporting their assets. And I sit back and I look at that and I say, does that really make sense, especially in today's dynamic environment where a lot of influence is being driven by driving the business forward. So with that, you need flexibility. The flexibility comes by allowing support providers the ability to come in and support the devices in a way that makes more sense. Corporate policy doesn't allow for that.
So with these organizations, right, who do they typically look to when they go out and look for support alternatives? Who do they look to, and again, how do they ultimately make that decision?
That's a great question. So, and I'm not going to kill everybody by PowerPoint here. I only have a few slides to kind of, show some of the data points. And once again, over the past few years, I've been running the same survey, and this revolves around who customers are using out in the market space to support their IT assets. What types of IT assets are they supporting, and why are they choosing them? So in 2013, I took a look at the market space, and this is on a worldwide basis. And we notice in this slide that approximately about 40% of enterprises utilize some sort of third-party maintainer. And this was across the globe, right? So it was a worldwide survey of approximately 525 enterprises. Made the same one in 2014, and we see that number increasing. So there's a trend in support, third-party support providers gaining more and more traction and being used inside enterprise IT data centers. This is good news for IT data center managers. This is allowing them some of that flexibility. Now, I'm pretty sure corporate policy is not mandating IT managers to go off and utilize third-party maintainers. But the companies that don't have that policy, you're seeing the flexibility, and you're beginning to see more utilization of third-party companies. Now, of course, third parties aren't going to be supporting the entire environment, right? They're going to utilize them when it makes sense, where it's cost effective, where they provide better flexibility and better support options. So if you take a look at it, it's really only between 25 and 50% of the IT assets. So this was survey data back in 2013. You can see how this holds true. It's a smaller, it's about half of the data center assets. And this makes sense. A lot of them are the legacy assets that they need to run and maintain in order to drive their businesses forward. So a lot of times you're not going to see a third-party maintainer supporting state-of-the-art equipment or large series or proprietary type assets. You're going to see them more on the back end supporting those legacy type assets. And like I said, this makes a lot of sense. It gives that enterprise the flexibility to be able to use probably a cost savings that they're seeing by utilizing a third party and using that money towards some of the new initiatives that we talked about earlier. And once again, just kind of survey data for 2014 stating the same thing, right? Looking at supporting these types of devices in the environment. And actually, we're seeing in 2014, even a few more of those assets are beginning to move in that direction.
Yeah, we see, Rob, that we don't always here at Curvature classify whether or not companies use third-party alternatives based solely on whether it's back office or lab or production gear. We look at it from the perspective of do they still require software from the OEMs directly, or is it a platform that's stable where they don't really require software updates, or maybe even software updates are not ever going to be available anymore because it's a mature platform. And we look at it from that perspective and try to determine what equipment is best still on the OEM support contract versus where can they save a lot of money by going to a third-party alternative when they don't need software. Although your slides are encouraging that 40 to 50% have made the move here in the U.S. Those that have made the move, what criteria are they utilizing to go out and choose which type of support organization is right for them?
Yeah, once again, Jeff, it kind of goes to that whole idea of that peer versus policy. Will policy enable the IT manager to be able to choose the right support organization? And the support organization, the IT manager is going to have different criteria. And here's a lot of the criteria that they are looking for. And through that corporate policy, will they be enabled enough to go after somebody who has some of these capabilities? Things like easy portals to use for ticketing, tracking, and inventory control. Your add, removes, deletes. IT environments today, the data center manager could be anywhere. Those assets can be anywhere. And be able to remotely look at those assets and see what's going on, where it's going on, and relying upon a good provider to be able to support that environment is very important. Also, a single point of contact. A lot of support providers that are on the third-party side have a tendency to be much easier to work with and generally have one or two people inside the organization that understand that environment extremely well. If you look at a lot of the vendors, you become a number. And you also have to call into a number and kind of go through sometimes a massive decision tree in order to get the right support, where utilizing third party, it generally is a little bit easier to receive that support. And generally, there's somebody you can rely upon, sort of a technical account manager or a single point of contact that you could turn to inside the organization that will ease the support process for you. They're also looking for more proactive and prescriptive monitoring type capabilities. We're beginning to see this more and more, and that is becoming a critical role, because the more proactive you are in the support cycle, the more that enterprise can rely upon you for support. And like I said, that's becoming more and more critical, because that business wants to focus in on business. And also the obvious, right? The different SLAs and contract types. You need to have flexibility. You need to have the right SLA. You need to have the right contracts. And when I talk about contracts, you know, will they bill me monthly? Will they bill me quarterly? Is there flexibility in how I get billed? Is there flexibility in how I can update and modify those contracts? Those flexibilities are very, very important to IT managers, because it allows them the flexibility to be able to drive down cost if need be, and also get the right SLA on the right devices. We all know mission-critical devices need a different support level than somebody in test and dev. And if corporate policy is dictating a 24/7 on everything, does that really make sense? So those are some of the issues. And then once again, and I promise this is my last slide with data points, we polled organizations out there as to why they utilize a third-party maintainer. And generally, what I hear from vendors is the number one reason is price. But that's really not the reason. If you take a look at why these enterprises are turning to third parties, you'll notice things like better offerings, easier to do business with, provides multi-vendor support. And I do have to apologize, there is a mistake on this slide. Less expensive and provides multi-vendor support should be flip-flopped. So it's over 15% of companies look at being able to do multi-vendor type support, and then less expensive. So less expensive was number 4 in their rationale for utilizing a third-party maintainer. And a lot of people think that's generally the number 1 reason. It's a great conversation starter, and definitely one of the rationales as to why you'd want to use a third-party maintainer, but it's not the number 1 reason why they make that change or decide to use them. And like I said, in your corporate policy, will it enable you to have that sort of flexibility? Corporate policy, probably not. Listening to your peers, though, and seeing what they're doing in the industry may help you make some of those decisions. Because if you see XYZ Bank rolling out some really cool mobility initiative, you may go to them and say, hey, why are you able to do this? Well, because I'm able to support my environment much more efficiently. Or how are you supporting it more efficiently? So those are some of the things that we're beginning to see businesses do today to help drive business and innovation forward.
Yeah, we see that in our own business, that ability to provide multi-vendor support across platforms and really providing a better SLA than the OEM, as well as making it very easy to do business with, are really the key attributes in why customers have begun to flock to our service offerings. We also, understand very innately that the big driver for these organizations is they have to balance that, that urgency of keeping the network up and innovation and growth with their IT systems. And so wherever they can save money, they need to be, and support contracts is an easy target for that. And as you said, only being cheaper is not the whole story. You have to provide a better service. But once these organizations they've now made the decision, okay, we're going to go to a third-party provider for support on some of our gear. How do they actually make that switch, right? What do they need to do to go from a single source provider through an OEM to now where they might have dual providers with some OEM support and some third-party maintenance support? What are the mechanics involved there that you're seeing?
Yeah, I mean that's a great point, and generally I equate it to almost switching insurance policies, right? If you're a GEICO customer and you want to move to them, it's generally that simple. But there's some really key attributes you really need to look at first before actually making that switch. Look at the engineering capabilities. Very important. Understand who your engineer is going to be. Understand who their backup is. Understand what their capabilities are. Look at the tool sets. We talked about this quite a bit as to one of the criteria as to who to decide. Tool sets are very important. Being able to analyze, troubleshoot issues, giving customers remote access into information and purview into their data center and data center assets is very critical. Range of offerings. Make sure that who you're going to be working with is going to be able to give that range of offerings. And then cost, right? Cost is always one of the big determinations. If they're able to save you a good sum of money, and you're able to take that money then and start working on new initiatives, that's a really key component, and that's one of the big reasons. I know it only came out number 4, but that is one of the big reasons why when I was doing a lot of this work that customers made the move. Spares location. Make sure you evaluate spares location. And it kind of goes back to that flexibility, being able to have spares maybe even on site. A lot of those capabilities in flexible pieces, a lot of the vendors have that capability to be that flexible. And other providers do have that capability. So once again, I keep on going back to that corporate policy, but these things are very important to IT managers. Knowledge, and not just the knowledge of the engineer, but the knowledge of the staff within the support organization of your own business. So when you're doing business with somebody that's a third-party support provider, chances are they're going to understand your environment much better than the vendor, because the vendor usually only has a very small purview into what they're supporting. When you look at more the third party or somebody who is in the business of support, they're going to be looking at your whole business and how you operate and help you understand what contract should be put in place. Then lastly, of course, references, right? References are key. And this kind of goes back to that whole peer position that I talked about. And if you notice how that third-party support has been growing over time as an overall enterprise is doing business with, I think the vast majority of that is through peer communication. Peers talking to other peers saying, hey, how are you doing this? How are you supporting that environment? Oh, I'm utilizing XYZ to do this, and I'm using ABC to do that. And they're helping me be able to migrate some of my legacy stuff because they're able to support it much more efficiently. So I think that references is very important. And then once all of that aligned, making that switch is very simple.
Yeah, we've found that like in most cases, when you have a strong incumbent like the OEM, those that are trying to change the dynamic really have to work harder. And so all of the things you mentioned, we have had to really bolster to customers what they get when they work with a third-party provider as opposed to the OEM. And unfortunately, we understand the extreme benefit that these organizations have to migrating to third-party maintenance alternatives, and we have to kind of coach them through the process of getting there. We hear all the time that one of the biggest drawbacks from going to a third-party provider is that they now have to support 2 support contracts, 2 support organizations. And so we've been forced to come up with very unique ways to alleviate that concern, one of which is one of the things you mentioned is a portal where they can put all of their assets into a portal to manage the contract, to manage where the asset is, to manage which support contract it's on, when the support contract comes of age, etc. And beyond that, we've also put in things, Rob, to alleviate the concern of, well, who do I call? So anyone who is on a Curvature NetSure contract, they call us for first call resolution on any asset that's in their network, whether or not it's on a NetSure support contract. So we'll take the first call, and we'll try to come to a resolution on that first call, whether or not we have the support contract for the device, at which point we determine that the device cannot be fixed or the problem resolved on that first call, we then will determine, okay, do we escalate this within the Curvature escalation path, or if it's a device that's on an OEM contract, at that point we will actually take the onus and hot transfer that call into the OEM support model. And our customers really gravitate to that and see that as a big value, because not only do they get one number to call, they also get the ability to where we'll, as I said, resolve their problem many times on that first call, whereas if they called into the OEM support desk, many times they're transferred 1, 2, 3 times before they even get to someone who can resolve that call for them. So I agree that the switch is easy, but we have to go out of our way to make the customers feel, comfortable that it's not cumbersome or burdensome to work with 2 providers.
Yeah, and that single point of contact, like you mentioned before, is critical. And we're beginning to see that a lot in enterprises. So a lot of the survey work that has been coming back from the field states that customers are looking for a single point of contact, and giving them the tools to be able to say, hey, we'll support everything. We'll make sure that your environment is supported, and we'll get in contact with the right people.
Yep.
That goes a long way.
Yep. So why don't you summarize a lot of this for us, Rob, in this last slide you have there?
So yeah, so like I mentioned before, company policy, is it the right policy? Should you be talking to some of your peers on how they're doing? Yeah, support is much different than it used to be years ago. IT is really looking to not support IT. They're really looking to drive business initiative forward. Looking for a single point of contact to ease that. Survey data showed us that as customers become more proactive, begin to consolidate down to single points of contact, they're jumping up about 10 percentage points, or 10% more of their time is being able to be spent on innovation and new projects because of consolidation efforts, because of utilizing new features and functionality and support, and focusing more on business innovation. And like I said, this is going to be more about what IT needs to support, and not what company policy dictates.
Yep, great.
Thanks, Rob. That was great. I hope all of our attendees enjoyed it. We have just a few minutes, and I know Jeff and Rob are available for an exclusive Q&A session. We do have a few of your questions that have come in. I apologize if we don't get to all of them today. We will follow up with you on all of the questions in the panel. One of the ones that came in that I'd love to have our panelists address is, as enterprises are moving towards cloud, how should they look at this strategy and support their legacy assets?
That's a great question. Obviously, cloud is that big term that's out there, and legacy assets generally are what's dragging them behind for looking at cloud type capabilities and initiatives. So, as I mentioned before, that legacy asset becomes very important to support, right? Because it's still generally running a lot of the mission-critical pieces of the business. And relying upon the right support provider becomes very important to enable them to then go off and evaluate, okay, how do I make that move and transition to newer technology or newer capabilities? Things like cloud and application initiatives. So turning to somebody who has the flexibility in allowing you to maybe take those legacy assets and draw them out over a longer period of time as you make this move is very important. A lot of vendors don't allow you to do that. They have a tendency to sometimes put like major end-of-life dates on things. And that's not how the way enterprises run. Enterprises run as we see fit. We'll move technologies. So that's very important. So those things allow for that cloud.
Yeah, and that's how I would have addressed that question too. I mean, part of the major benefits of dealing with a third-party support organization rather than the OEM is that there is no end of life or end of support for specific products, and you can use them and utilize them in your networks as long as you, the customer, sees fit. And that legacy gear sometimes is a great augment to cloud services, in that to connect to the cloud offerings, you don't always need the latest and greatest edge switch, and you can utilize a device that's a generation or two back. And as long as you can get support for that device, then you have a huge cost advantage and a huge cost savings by utilizing that equipment that works. And that, in general, is a major reason why organizations should look to third-party providers, is the ability to keep what's working longer and not arbitrarily upgrade just because the OEM is telling you to.
Excellent. Thank you both, Jeff and Rob, for answering those questions. That puts us right at time. For our audience, if it turns out your question wasn't answered, we'll be following up with you shortly via email. And if you still have questions, we're going to leave the question panel on for a little bit longer so you can send them over to us if you still have some. Just in closing today, I'd love to thank the audience for their time and attention. We hope you enjoyed the webinar. You will receive a follow-up email with a link to the recording of today's session, as well as a copy of the research paper we mentioned, which is the Peers versus Policy. Feel free to keep in touch with us. All of our social media is up on the screen. You can talk about the webinar by tweeting to us at Curvature and with the hashtag CurvatureWebinar. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us today.